Tina North, from the book, Singers, by Peter Maguire. Read by Lucy Wharton. The night is like a lovely tune. Beware, my foolish heart. How white, the ever-constant moon. Take care, my foolish heart. Back Cannon Street was a cul-de-sac. A dead end. Narrow pavements, to the left and to the right, grey stone slabs. Sooty rain had ended some minutes before, glistened fish-scale damp in the glare of a sodium-yellow street light. The 3-pace width roadway was cobbled, never having been sufficiently important to smell macadam. Flanked by 3-storied buildings dating from the late Victorian and the early years of the century following. It had always been the street of minor offices and small workshops, providing services that were essential, but without an importance that necessitated their location on streets with greater pretensions. Bookkeepers, leather goods, ribbon makers, money lenders who specialized in small sums at high interest rates. It was 9:30 in the evening. All doors were now shut. Not one lonely, dust-flecked, 40-watt light bulb glimmered out through a grimy window. The current commercial occupants, following trades not dissimilar and outlook when compared with those of 70 or 80 years earlier, having departed to their comparatively more sanitary and mod-con residences in the suburbs. Tina North turned right off Corporation Street and into the narrow way. Back Cannon Street boasted only a single street light. Heels clicking, she walked with penguin shuffles up the impasse, her thoughts showing no concern or curiosity about the workshops and offices that lined her route, their history, past or present, the neglected doors, which here and there displayed a faded gilded label. Her dress her primary focus. She had run it up that very morning. The hem, ankle length, was much too tight. Damn. Dark hours and street lamp, rendered feeble, sodium glare defeated by unwashed air, yellow one-eyed owl perched high on a cast-iron post. Something you expected in this city. So familiar that most people never noticed or even imagined it could be any different. Tina North, having gone more than 3/4 along the street, was not disconcerted, perhaps even comforted, seeing through the gloom the familiar neon sign. Fixed high up on the wall that blocked off at the end of the street, attempted to shine out and proclaim with a modicum of glamour, "Chez Joey." In the half-open doorway beneath this chewing gum green neon sign, a bulky coated mass, edgeless in the half-light, stood the chilled guardian of this portal to paradise. Never known by a surname, just Dave. He smiled at the slight figure, her ankle grazing hem, tottering and clicking along the pavement towards him. She smiled and wished him good evening, remarking that the weather was foul. He drawled in agreement, responding with a hint of what he assumed to be mid-Atlantic parlance considered appropriate for the doorman of what was reputed to be one of the better nightclubs in town. Tina North stood still for a moment, her 5'1", wearing heels, alongside the cliff face that was Dave, and mentioned Thursday. Not too many people on a Thursday. Dave was an optimist, always happier when admitting punters through his door, then, when he needed to on rare occasions, ejecting them between the jams into the street. Chez Joey was a well-run establishment with an insignificant number of riffraff being allowed in to prop up the bar. "Let's wait and see," was his neutral response. Tina North smiled. Dave smiled back with a benevolence large people are able to afford small people, and pushed open the door to give Tina unencumbered entrance into what a local newspaper had described, within recent memory, a great night out. Entering the club at this time of an evening, for most regulars, would have been most unfamiliar. Night clubs thrive on illusion. Dim lights. Music. The understated sound of alcoholic liquids being poured into glasses and drawn from beer pumps. Indecipherable chatter and whispered conversation. For Tina North, who once had illusions, now long gone, this was the reality before the evening properly commenced. Ronnie, the owner of the Chez Joey, was somewhere out back in his office. Sue and Albert behind the bar shuffled glasses and polished them needlessly. The brimming optics were in place, their bull's eyes ready to dispense Caledonian tipples. Thin slices of lemon already cut. Maraschino cherries stickily red in bowls. Cocktail sticks to hand. All the necessaries required to assemble aspirational drinks. The bandstand was the fulcrum around which the club pivoted. Semi-circular. The performing surface 2 foot higher than club floor level. White baby grand piano. No upright pianos allowed in my classy establishment. Ronnie had been heard to say rather more than once. A lone microphone awaited the nicotine-flavored breath of a vocalist. Resident trio were doing the things musicians do. The drummer flicked a cymbal with his brushes. The bass player tuned a string. The pianist played a chord or two, not basic 3-note spans, more advanced harmonies. This was a club with attitude and a class trio. Sitting on a chair in front of the rhythm section, casually holding a trombone, sliding the slide and applying a drop of oil, the reason why some people specifically came to the Chez Joey to listen to the music. The trombone player, a small round man, solid rather than fat, his straight fair hair brilliantine glossy and combed back. The trombone is one of the more vocal instruments, and Kenny, the trombonist, could make his instrument talk and weave dreams. He could create sadness, gaiety, thoughtfulness, having that quality all gifted musicians possess, an effortless ability to tell a story. Not a particularly handsome man, his general conversation hedged towards the taciturn, however there was no argument when it came to attracting women. You could also argue that much good it did them, getting to know Kenny. Fidelity and consideration did not feature as the solo spot of his off-bandstand repertoire. Soon the red velvet curtain that shrouded the bandstand from the public view would be closed, only to be opened again as the band moved into the opening number of the evening during the time when public began to trickle into the club, via the coat check, the heavily curtained inner archway, and find their way to sit at a table or perch on a bar stool. Standing inert for an instant, Tina North said to herself, "Stupid cow," inwardly admitting at yet again having been deluded. But this inevitable moment of anticipation coming through the door, regardless, generally raised her pulse rate a notch or two. There were nods all round. To bar staff, to the band, nothing emphatic. This was a familiar 6 nights a week routine, less of a greeting than an acknowledgement that they were all there and still breathing. The curtain would shield off the bandstand. The bar staff fixed their professional smiles and assumed bonhomie. The lights would dim. Yet another evening at the Chez Joey would commence. Ronnie, who had a developed sense of theatre, personally choreographed and insisted upon the performance of this every evening opening routine. Tina North slipped past the bar and into the small room that doubled as band and dressing room. As mirror, in tribute to the dressing rooms of more august and legitimate establishments, several shadeless light bulbs were fixed at intervals around the unpainted wooden frame. To one side and opposite to the dressing table, a worn leather-covered settee. The band's street coats hung from a row of hooks fixed on the wall adjacent. One flat cap, 2 trilby hats, one black, one brown, and a dark blue fedora. Overflowing ashtrays graced a small table, half a bottle of cheap Scotch whiskey and a couple of recently drained glasses providing them with company. One thing you could never say about the boss Ronnie, that he grudged the band and singers a free drink or two. Tina North took off her coat and hung it on the spare hook, swore at the self-inflicted hem of her dress and sat down in front of the illuminated mirror. She took a cigarette from her handbag, lit it, using a cigarette lighter that always invoked unwelcome thoughts, inhaled deeply, blew a stream of smoke into the face of her reflection in the mirror. It would be at least an hour before she would have to stand up and sing. Why the hell do I keep it? Interrogating herself and putting the cigarette lighter back into her handbag. It was a chromium article. Not especially expensive. It could have been replaced and then discarded without even creating a small tremor in her budget. The cheap chrome shined back at her from the depths of the handbag. One side of the machined metal was engraved with large italic letters. From Jeff with much love. Simple objects can and do open doors into places where good sense might tell us not to enter. The barriers we construct within our minds are breached and unwanted recollection floods those fissures that are too large for any Dutch boy's finger to stem the deluge. Tina North had always loved to sing. With the choir at school. Was always willing to stand up in front of people during sundry family occasions to perform the most recent additions to her catalogue of songs. Generally they were not the school-taught Lover and His Lass and similar traditional airs and melodies. Tina North had at a young age developed a fascination with what had become known as the Great American Songbook. It was the natural result of a daily life, from a very early age, living with the radio ever on, 78 revolutions per minute vinyl, or in a more affluent later, the cherished and admired Dansette. Manny, her father, had managed to leave Germany sometime in the mid-30s. His perception of what might be proving rather more acute than some. Recently married with one small daughter, Tina North's elder sister Ruby. His first choice of destination would have been the United States, but this had not been possible, so England, where he already had family members, provided a sort of welcome. Manny loved all things American, and not having the opportunity to settle there was a regret in life remarkably free of any regret. Popular music in particular. Show tunes. Bright tunes. Happy tunes. Sad tunes. Sophisticated harmonies and lyrics that elevated the best examples of the genre that could be appreciated by the unbiased, almost as an art form. He would wander the house spontaneously reciting, half singing, seriously clever and intricate couplets. Then you and I came wandering by, and lost in a sigh, they all laughed at Christopher Columbus, when he said the world was round. They all laughed when Edison recorded sound. I make a date for golf and you can bet your life it rains. I try to give a party and the guy upstairs complains. I guess I'll go through life just catching colds and missing trains. Word games, set to music, entranced the young Tina North, and surprisingly early thoughts hinted that singing to live and living to sing might be a possibility when she became older. Leaving school at 16 with the dull job in an office inevitable, a period of stagnation most young girls accepted without question, knowing, also without questioning, the real business of life, a man, somewhere to live, and children, would at last release them from the penal confines of metaphoric stationery cupboards. For Tina North the journey into adulthood commenced. The difference and possible escape route. Tina North had a talent. Talent night at the local working men's club was for her first success. There was no question that a pretty girl with doubtful vocal abilities could be looked upon kindly. Talent nights were evenings when wives were reluctantly admitted, and this excluded the presentation of more venal entertainment. Tina North was both pretty and did have actual vocal ability. Ordinary menfolk, a description not intended in any way to be pejorative, on occasion, could and did raise their line of sight above the breasts of a performer towards the vocal cords and the sounds this subtle organ was producing. Tina North quickly became a noted and valued performer on the circuit. Ubiquitous network of social gathering places covering the surrounding counties in much the same way a fishnet stocking enhances a fine leg. A mesh of not unpleasant venues providing cheap beer and conviviality, an appetite for entertainment and performers that was almost insatiable. Working men's clubs, trade clubs, Labour Party clubs, Liberal Party clubs, Conservative Party clubs, the British Legion. The essential attribute of all these establishments, the provision of solid familiarity, migrating typical front rooms, lounges, perhaps even a drawing room at the upper end of the strata, into a larger arena. They were a place where you could meet, almost always male only, friends, workmates, colleagues, and acquaintances, the appellation determined by the social mix of a given establishment. A degree of comfort without pretension. Untroubled by the presence of women or wives. The only female exception, mature, fanciable, unthreatening, and unavailable, serving behind the bar, an honorary man with curves. Sunday lunchtimes, at clubs lower down the social scale, featured comedians whose repartee was in general as blue was their 5 o'clock shadows. Such weekly presentations often included tired women, whose inwardly bored routines involved removing their clothes with an illusion of slowness that was in reality haste. The audience trading shared bravado rather than a meaningful aura of group eroticism. Sunday lunchtimes were popular, particularly for wives, getting the men out from under their feet so they could get on with cooking the Sunday dinner. After much debate, and in some places bitterly contested guerrilla resistance, women reluctantly began to be admitted on certain, well-defined, days of the week, but only if accompanied by a related male person. So evenings of more legitimate and titillation excluded entertainment, included the presence of wives, girlfriends, and now and then a disapproved of, but silently sideways glanced at fancy women. Tina North flowered performing to these mixed-sex audiences and rapidly developed her act into an anticipated favorite. Generally, she sang the kind of songs that Manny loved and continued to love. The audience, most of who were of a similar age to Manny, loved them too. Gaining both experience and confidence, the dull office job paroled her without regret, the office manager and the other girls wishing her well without disclosing or discarding their own inward reservations. Tina North began her career as a professional singer. Quite something for an 18-year-old. The money was good. Other girls she knew, though now saw much less of them, talked between themselves about her doings with some envy and an unspoken shudder, concerning the risk of breaking away from what was expected, surely would precipitate. Working the club circuit, Tina North provided very little time or inclination to get involved in relationships, casual or otherwise. Most of the young men she had known from her school days had by this time become couples, frivolity being replaced by serious consideration about acquiring three-piece suites. Those who floated freely, when she did occasionally meet one, appeared cautious. Tina North had become very self-confident and because of her life as a performer exhaled a certain touch of glamour. Young men prefer a sense of being dominant within relationships, even though this is often a skillfully woven fiction. There were much less demanding rocks for them to climb. So just a smile or two. How are you? Great, you are doing so well. See you around. The regulars at the various clubs on the circuit did usually include at least one, Jack the lad, but they got nowhere. Time, a lack of time too, was also against them. Get to the club. Get dressed. Do your slot or slots in the evening's program. Get changed. Taxi. Get home generally after midnight. Bed. Most nights of the week and especially late at weekends. The Sycamores had a rather more upmarket ambience than the average club. The membership-owned building was late Victorian. Kept in good repair. A bowling green at the back. The interior looked acceptable even when the main lights were on. Drinks cost a fraction more, but cheaper than in the pubs. Collar and tie neatly encapsulated the profile of the average regular. George Mason, retired middle management of some description, regularly took his chair close to the podium when Tina North was appearing. His regularity, sitting off right of the band stand, made him noticeable. Between songs and announcing the next one, looking on stage down on him, she thought that he must have once been a good-looking man. He had retained a vibrant head of brown turning grey hair, unlike most of the audience whose shining pates jostled and bobbed like a cluster of pink planets. Very blue eyes. A gentle mouth and smile. One particular Saturday evening, when getting out of the club and home was not so pressing, Tina strolled by his table towards the bar. He smiled a friendly smile, and politely offered her a drink, inviting her to sit at his table. She immediately felt comfortable. George Mason was no aging Lothario desperately needing to prove that he could still keep it up. They had a pleasant, non-demanding chat, about this and that. He said how much he liked her singing and the songs, mentioned in passing his late wife and shared her taste for songs she sang. Tina North noticed his very fine, strong white hands. There had been a time when he had worked underground. Flecks of coal dust under the skin on the back of his hands fixed a period in his past life as permanently as if they had been tattooed. An unscheduled Friday night at the Sycamores was one of those unforeseen engagements. They telephoned her during the afternoon. Tina North was unexpectedly free and they needed to find someone to fill a spot that should have seen another performer up behind the microphone. Some kind of family problem. So around 10 on that Friday, Tina North launched into her first number of the evening. This being a Friday, there was not a free chair in the room. Performers tend to fix upon one individual in an audience as a focal and vocal point of attention. George Mason was there sitting in his customary place. Tina North gave him a friendly smile of recognition and doing so realized that sitting next to him was a man in his early 20s, unmistakably, George's son. Standing on a stage and looking out, you rarely take in detail. Faces here and there might or might not be recognizable later. Then there again, perhaps not. It creates situations where performing artists are greeted as being an old acquaintance, the delusion and illusion being, that they would surely have seen and remembered. George's son came into that rarer category of a face that did emerge from the crowd, a hillock pushing its head above the flatness of the plain. Hair similar in waves and contours to his father. Though not grey of course. A bit taller than George. Slim with angular shoulders. Wearing a two-piece suit that had never hung on the chromium rail of any cheaper retail outfitter. Ignoring intuition is a dangerous game. Most people do. Only later realizing the undefinable importance of a wisp of first impressions. His smile, though similar to that of George Mason, was just a little different. Jeff, if he had have been diamond, would have shone out from the tumbling glint of glass and paste scattered randomly over the velvet display pad. Tina North would in time future become aware that grading diamonds, no matter how much they sparkle, when viewed under a glass, can reveal many a hidden flaw. Diamonds are just compressed lumps of carbon even if they do sparkle. But that was then. Not now. The description a rough diamond did not apply to Jeff. His exterior appeared to be smooth perfection. Tina North was in no particular hurry that evening when she had completed her stint under the spotlight. The audience had been both warm and appreciative. Different class of crowd than the previous evening at working at the Trades Club. There had never been a jukebox installed in the Sycamores. Tina North retreated into, what was in comparison to many other venues, a well-appointed dressing room. There was a private lavatory, a wash basin, and a hot tap that actually accessed hot water. Changing without haste out of her stage dress, she cleaned her lips with a tissue and applied a slightly more muted shade of lipstick. The sounds of the final act of the evening, a comedian, doing jokes and a routine suitable for this more respectable club and audience, was finishing off with his song and signature tune. Soon after this most would leave for home, creating a quieter atmosphere to be enjoyed, while those who remained ordered a concluding round of drinks. "How nice to see you again." Tina North smiled, walking directly to his table through the backstage door. Handshakes and certainly not kisses constituted no part of the greeting. Anything other than facial recognition and response would have caused George awkward discomfort. He responded with evident pleasure. "Come and sit down, lass. If you have time." It was both a question and an invitation. She sat down opposite to George, momentarily scanning the features of the young man sitting beside him. George called over the waiter and ordered Tina North a gin and tonic. "Meet my son Jeff," said George with a touch of pride in his voice, "just finished at university." Stressing the word, university, to add additional importance to what was self-evidently already important. Tina North leaned across the small table and they shook hands. Being younger, they had discarded some of the tactile inhibitions that plagued older generations. His hand was firm, dry, soft-skinned, the only hardness a ring on his finger. A signet ring with JM in Gothic script engraved on its facet. What followed did present anything especially significant. Jeff had finished university. Had a good job, not described or detailed. George did add, however, he gets a company car, a statement that was enunciated with pleasure and certain measure of awe. They talked about her singing. Jeff told her how much he liked them. And her performance style. Not even a hint of wanting to gain anything other than surface information. After about half an hour, Tina North said she must go. A previously ordered taxi had arrived. Jeff said it was a pity he had known this earlier and would have been more than happy to drive her home. She thanked him. Collecting her coat and bag from the dressing room, she waved goodbye. Jeff slipped across the room and asked politely if he might be allowed to telephone her. Tina North thought about this proposal for a moment, considered, thought for a second or two more, and gave him one of the small visiting cards she always carried in her handbag. Jeff looked at the card for a moment and said, "You don't have an agent?" Tina North replied, "No. Do I need one? I always have more than enough work." The taxi sounded a horn outside. They exchanged polite smiles and she left through the main door and got into the already open rear door of the taxi. Tina North could hear through the half-closed door of the dressing room, Ralph, the master of ceremonies, singing the opening bars of the song he always sang to open the every evening cabaret at the Chez Joey. "She gets too hungry for dinner at 8. She likes the theater and never comes late. She never bothers with people she'd hate. That's why the lady is a tramp. Ralph was neither a lady or a tramp. Tall and slim, his skin tanned to a degree pitched to a hue exactly between the cheap and the outrageous, honed not with a bottle or time spent on sunny beaches, but the infrared rays of a sun lamp. Clothes, bespoke suits, always immaculate. Beautifully groomed hair, blues eyes, and a set of teeth that added unfamiliar joy to the soul of his dentist when he went to the surgery for his regular checkups. Shoes, never any vulgar two-tone, cared for with exactitude and passion. Ralph was a very good-looking man, inclining towards the beautiful. He had a very good singing voice and knew how to work an audience. Any audience. Occasionally he took dates at clubs other than the Chez Joey, usually Sunday lunchtime sallies into sundry venues on the circuit. Even the most male discovered it hard not to silently admire him. Women of course knew, unlike most men they possess intuition that rarely leaves a corner in darkness. Tina North, with some regret, also knew. Ralph, though not effeminate within any possible interpretation of this epithet, preferred men. He did like women and was in turn adored by them, but was disinclined, much to their regret, to invite them to share his bed. Ronnie, who owned of the Chez Joey, knew the price and the value of most things valued Ralph, the allure he added to his beloved club, and nurtured both the man and his services accordingly. Tina North took another cigarette from the packet, put the tipped end between her lips, found the lighter and took it from the bottom of her bag, lit it and drew in a long slow breath. The chromium cap extinguished the flame with a click in an instant and dropped it from a murderous height back into the depths of her handbag. Jeff telephoned her a couple of days after their first meeting at the Sycamores. Polite, not insistent, apparently making no assumptions, he suggested they might have a drink sometime soon. Evenings were of course difficult for her because of vocal commitments. It was agreed Jeff would collect her in his car that coming Sunday afternoon around midday. Manny, who missed very little, scented the essence of the telephone conversation, but made no comment, but his face morphed into an expression of approval. That was Manny. Rarely asking questions, but nevertheless caring. The first month of her time spent with Jeff was a period of quiet restraint. He lived in a rented flat on the far side of town in a pleasant tree-lined street with well-maintained red brick detached houses. His job seemed to pay well, though he never discussed in any detail of what his work entailed. Collecting her, usually on a Sunday afternoon, they would return to his flat, he would cook a meal, a good cook. They would talk, perhaps flirt a little. But nothing heavy. Jeff profiled the glowingly described type loved by women's weeklies. He was the elusive perfect gentleman. Tina often had singing engagements on a Sunday evening and he would drive to wherever she was working, never staying. Work matters to complete before the morning. And Tina would happily get a taxi at the end of the evening to take her home. She enjoyed spending time with him and began, without really trying, came to like him more and more. Love is a word often used, less often really meant. But within her own conception of this emotion, Tina became convinced that love of some kind was becoming a part of the equation. Innocence, whatever innocence is, open to debate, had been forfeited after a Christmas party at the end of first year working in an office. Too much to drink. Silly agreement to a car ride with one of the better-looking males. Somewhere on the top moor above the city, she remembered looking at distant streetlights fizzing, a ground-level starfield and galaxy. Other than that she remembered almost nothing. The next day slight soreness, no pregnancy resulted, no panic, no feeling of guilt, because in mind and even in body she really had not been present. There was no repeat performance. No urgent desire to replicate what had been for her a non-experience. 1 month after her first rendezvous with Jeff on a sunny Sunday afternoon she started sleeping with him. Though sleeping is not an accurate description. She discovered herself to be there both in mind and body. Manny remarked a few days later how well she was looking. Relationships can be static, elastic, explosive. Their relationship was gentle. Jeff was caring and attentive. He often discussed how he could become her agent. Apply his business skills to develop her singing career. Use his contacts to wheedle out contracts with recording labels, radio producers, television. They would discuss the possibilities for hours and verbally dream about a future together. The cars, the house with the river running along the bottom of the garden. Talk that excited Tina. She knew the extent of her talent. She knew she could please a bigger and wider audience. But somehow these swooping dreams were never transformed into anything tangible. Jeff would say that it was at the top of his list to start working on it next week. The weeks went on by. The job, he said. Pressure of work, he said. Next week, he said. The weeks arrived, dissolved, and repeated themselves. One Sunday afternoon some months after they had first met, he picked her up. In his car at the usual time. The drive was uncharacteristically silent. Jeff looked worried and his face had the recognizable markers of a lack of sleep. Gently caressing the nape of his neck, she asked him what was the matter. He pulled the car into a parking spot off the highway and stopping the car and turning off the engine looked into her face and said, "I really do not know how to ask you. Try me." She replied, innocently. "Money," was his response. "A friend of mine. Well, he asked me to lend him some money. I said no problem. But something has come up. I need him to repay me urgently, but he can't find the wherewithal for a few weeks. I really do need it now. How much do you need?" Tina asked without questioning. Jeff hesitated for an instant. Only much later did Tina realize he had been mentally calculating just how much he could ask for with the certainty of getting it. "I need £100. She pressed her hand over his. It was damp. She remembered the dry, firm palm of their first physical contact. "I will get it for you from the bank in the morning." "Okay." Relief visibly rippled down his features. He leaned across and kissed her. "I will come to collect from your house tomorrow if that is all right with you." He gave her a warm kiss and added, "Don't say anything to Manny, will you?" He started up the engine and they reached his flat about 20 minutes later. He cooked for them as usual. They went to bed about 3 in the afternoon. The day was not quite same as the week before. In the evening he drove her to the Sycamores where she had been booked to appear. He said he could not stay, work to do, not even time enough to say hello to his father. We make concessions and excuses for those we care for. Seek explanations that explain nothing. Apply rationale that displays slender affinity with the rational. The request for a loan, explained as being needed because he had made a loan that the friend who was unable to repay immediately, became a marker as their relationship progressed, always hesitant, never pleading, the facial worry dissolving when she assented to his request. Love is not blind. It just prefers not to see. The moment came, however, when Tina's carefully nurtured savings account could not hand out any further largesse. Hearing this, the strain on Jeff's face perceptibly moved from stress to fearfulness. The following Sunday afternoon was gloomy outside the window of the flat. Rain dripped from the branches of the chestnut tree opposite to the window. The bedsheets remained cold and unrumpled in the adjoining room. After a long silence, he told her that addictive gambling was his problem. It had started with card playing for money when he was at university, developed into visits to a casino, betting on horses, other unexplained forms of wager. His salary could not meet his obligations. His credit lines with the established bookmakers and casinos had been terminated. Money was, however, freely available but from less forgiving sources. The courts were not their means of balancing the books. Experience had taught them that more robust methods produced hard cash results, applied to him unless he was able to settle, even in part, what was owed. Tina was not shocked hearing what Jeff had said, not delivered as a humble confession, more just a statement of fact. "I will have a think about it during the week and see what I can come up with." Standing up and walking across the room, looked out of the window at the tangle of black and wet. "Sunday is gloomy. My hours are slumberless. Dearest, the shadows I live with are numberless. There is always a song to match the occasion." She thought to herself, unable to suppress a weak inward smile. "Look. You have an early night. Call me a taxi to take me to work. I will telephone you sometime tomorrow when I have had more time to see what I might be able to do to help you out." When the taxi came to collect her, they did not exchange kisses. Manny called up to her room. "Tina. Jeff on the phone. He wants to talk to you." She came down and answered it. The conversation was brief. No, she had not thought of a way out as yet, but would get back to him as soon as she had thought of something. The line clicked and went dead. "What's up?" asked Manny. "Oh, nothing. Just how to fit in some extra work Jeff is fixing up for me." Manny, who had lived long and seen much, seemed unconvinced. He grunted a little and went into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee. "It's me," said Jeff when he telephoned on Wednesday morning. "Everything is going to be fine. I have found a way to settle up with those blood-sucking bastards, and I might even have enough over to pay you back too." He sounded more relaxed and even elated. "I will pick you up Sunday evening. I know you are not working. Take you out for supper and then back to the flat. Maybe you could stay over. Must go. Work to do. See you Sunday. Kisses." He hung up. Jeff arrived. Exchanged a friendly word or two with Manny. They drove off into the evening. He was going to take her to a really nice Italian restaurant not far from his flat. The sun hovered and faded in a darkening cloudless sky. "Can you afford it?" She asked him. The car parked and walking towards the restaurant Constanza. "Of course I can. Don't worry. All will be well. This evening is for you." They went in and were greeted with pizza smiles. Ushered to a nicely situated table. Linen cloth. Fabric napkins. No red paper squares in this establishment. They sat down, the pizza smile assisting Tina with her chair. A small dish of olives and breadsticks were brought to the table by an attentive waiter. They both nibbled. Jeff looked over the menu with practiced familiarity. "Veal for me, I think. And for you, waiter. A bottle of Bardolino." The meal progressed and reassurance seeped into Tina's arteries. The road it had to traverse, smoothed to greater evenness after several glasses of the wonderful Italian red wine. There was little conversation. The meal was, to utilize that misused word, memorable. When Jeff had paid the bill, the patron opened the door and beamed them out of the restaurant and into the night. Walking back to the car, Tina turned and, raising her head, kissed him hard and long on his lips. Moved his face into view and smiled. His flat was brightly lit when Jeff opened the door and stood aside to let Tina into the small square hallway. Remembering Manny and his slightly resented obsession with always turning out unused lights, she offered no objection. Perhaps it was a good sign, indicative of the actual conclusion to all of Jeff's money troubles. The main room was also brightly lit. The 5-bulb light fitting hanging from the ceiling, the table lamp standing on a small table beside the sofa. The curtains were all tightly drawn. Tina without guile remarked on the room's resemblance to a well-lit stage set. Jeff poured out a couple of glasses of scotch and they sat closely down on the sofa. And so it began. "Can we turn down the lights? Thought we might leave them on. Tonight I really want to see you as you really are. Beautiful. Desirable. You have no need to be seen in subdued lighting. Not you." Sliding a practiced hand inside the back of her blouse, he undid the clasp using 2 fingers. Her unrestrained breasts retained their elevation and relaxed. Things moved on. Tina imperceptibly became aware of an unwanted and unexpected inward anxiety. She felt no recollection of this being in any way alike to their previous lovemaking. It seemed stage-managed. Her body. His hands. The unbuttoning before removal and exposure. Had it been scripted in advance? Telling herself not to be idiotic. Loosen up and enjoy. The sensation of being used as plaint marionette refused to subside. She pulled away from him sharply. "That noise. What is it?" "What noise?" "Just something outside in the street." "Relax," soothing her with a kiss. Tina allowed herself to be kissed, and then reflex suddenly, stood up, her body rigid with that instinct that overtakes normality and invokes the irresistible, an urge to run. She looked down on him sitting flushed and uncomfortable. She spun a dancer's turn on the sole of her right foot and found herself looking at the door of a walk-in cupboard set in the wall. What was it? Just a normal door. Then she saw the aperture. Directly in the middle and shoulder height, a neat road hole that glinted for an instant, then in an instant became a dead eye. 4 paces, Tina pulled open the door. Inside stood a well-built man. And in his right hand, dangling by his side, holding an expensive Super 8 video camera. There was no threat to her implied in his stance or attitude. Perhaps just a hint of unsaid "have seen it all before" amusement. His idea, darling, he explained, pointing the camera at Jeff. Owes us lot of money. Our money. We want it back. His delivery was in short monotone phrases. Blue movie. For us, money in the bank. Gets him off the hook. Maybe a little to spare for services rendered. Know what I mean? Casually he clicked off the camera power switch. Tina turned. You filthy bastard. Self-preservation took over. Grabbed up her handbag with one hand and tried to fasten her gaping blouse with the other. Rushed to the front door and opened it. She did not look back. The cameraman inside the flat emphasized, "We will get what we are owed. One way or another." In the evening it was difficult to find a taxi in this outer district. Eventually a cab that had dropped off a fare took pity and drove her away through the dark wet streets and roads towards her home. Sitting in the dark and slightly damp rear of the cab, her rigidity started to subside, though not entirely. Taxi drivers who develop an instinct for the woes and troubles of some of their fares indulged in the odd pleasantry, nothing more, and at her request dropped her some distance away from her house. It was too early to go in though, she was desperate to reach the comfort of her bedroom. Manny would still be awake watching the television. He would ask questions she would prefer not to answer. 6 weeks later she had been booked into her regular spot at the Sycamores. George Mason was sitting there, with his usual calm smile, at his table by the bandstand. Behind the microphone Tina saw George but no Jeff. Later, when the entertainment for the evening had finished, she accepted his invitation to have a drink with him. It was soon obvious that he knew nothing about her relationship with his son. Obliquely she inquired, "How is Jeff keeping?" George Mason replied with unrestrained animation, "Wonderful. He was offered a job abroad. Somewhere in the Middle East. Very well paid. It came out of the blue. Had to leave almost at once. I had a postcard from him just a week or so ago." Tina thought for a moment and decided why inflict the sins of the son onto the father. Manny would have approved. 2 more years consolidated her status as an appreciated and reliable performer. An offer came from the owner of the Chez Joey to join the permanent entertainment staff. The money was generous. No more traveling here and there around the circuit. Reasonably defined working hours. She accepted with no regrets. She saw George Mason just one more time after the final booking she had agreed to do at the Sycamores the week before she was due to start working at the Chez Joey. The same old constant George. Jeff was doing well. Remained living and working abroad. Had got married. No children yet. Here was hoping. Sometime later Tina heard from another performer that George Mason had suffered from a stroke and immobility confined him to his home and to the care of a widowed sister. Thursday evening at the Chez Joey had ended. It was now early Friday. Ralph concluded his last spot and every evening with the song, "The Party's Over." She had heard the song hundreds of times, sung by others and herself. Tina, sitting in the dressing room and looking at herself in the mirror, listened more intently than she usually did. The words of the lyric reaching in assumed a requiem quality. The party's over. The candles flicker and dim. You danced and dreamed. Through the night. It seemed to be right. Just being with him. The resident trio had put on coats and hats and rushed off into the night. The city had many small clubs that continued to operate into the early hours, well beyond the time when the Chez Joey had closed its doors. Many featured trios of varied ability. Musicians with a leaning towards jazz regard bed as a place to be avoided unless it included a female occupant. The bar staff were cleaning up. Dave on the street door thinking about going on somewhere for a drink or two. The main lights were all on, awaiting for the arrival of the cleaning ladies. The public had left. Harsh white light. All illusion had departed until it was resurrected again in the evening with the mere flick of a light switch or two. Tina lit a final cigarette sitting in front of the illuminated mirror. Yes, she continued to be an attractive woman. This she could register clearly without affectation. The hem of her dress continued to chafe her ankles. Picking up a pair of scissors, an essential accoutrement in any dressing room, she leaned over in her chair and cut a long slit through the hem and up along her right leg. Freedom of movement received a grateful welcome. She stubbed the half-smoked cigarette on the logo-embossed aluminium ashtray. Dave, sensing her presence, pulled open the door to allow her access to back Cannon Street. They exchanged goodnight sentiments, not hollow but meant, and she walked off and along the pavement toward the main street, joyfully ambulant. Halfway along the street she hesitated, stood still, plunged her hand into her bag, fumbled for a moment, her fingertips touched the metal, Braille read the inscription, pulled the chromium lighter clear of other entanglements. Tina North gracefully bent her knees and dropped the chromium love token through an opening slot in cast iron grid that covered a drain. Just a gentle plop, then it was gone. She stood up to her full height, 5'1" in heels, and walked on towards the brighter lights of the main thoroughfare. In the wee small hours of the morning, while the whole wide world is fast asleep, you lie awake and think about the boy, and never, ever think of counting sheep. Until now. If you enjoyed Tina North and would like to receive notifications of forthcoming videos, please press the subscribe and like buttons.